Hello, welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of the CMC's Board of Trustees, and I'm director of the nonprofit Higher Education Alliance. I'm really happy to see everybody here today. Today, CMC presents Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, a World Heritage Site, sponsored by Fahlgren Mortine and in partnership with the Ohio History Connection and the Ohio Travel Association, each represented here by many friends and associates. Would you please help me thank them? To set the mood today, we've invited poet Ricky Santer to read her poem, Moon Over Newark, which is inspired by the Ohio Earthworks. Ricky?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Some time ago when my family, my husband, my son, and I moved to Columbus from Baltimore, Maryland, we were absolutely thrilled to come upon the earthworks in Newark, Ohio. But I also wondered why a ceremonial octagon was located on a golf course at Mountain Builders Country Club. And as a former journalist, I started researching the Hopewell of Ohio. And in some time, a collection of poetry emerged. I want to publicly thank Dr. Brad Lepper, sitting at our panel, who guided me through my research. In fact, the last poem of the collection is dedicated to him and his theory of the Great Hopewell Road. I also want to thank so much the Columbus Metropolitan Club for so generously inviting me to be part of this program. I'm going to read a poem from my collection called Moon Over Newark. From observatory mound, your gaze rolls straight through circle, then octagon, to meet the moon on the northern horizon, datum at its supreme northern rise. These former plains are an ocean marked by silent avenues. Parallel walls 5 feet tall will guide you through nearly 19 years of lunar cycle, the maximum and minimum of her rising and setting by way of 8 pivotal points. Tonight's crescent charms in menthol air. The astronomer priests are away, but their lunar observatory still condenses time. You tether onto the wisp of a lost chant. You think you hear the purl of the moon in the soft chortle of freshwater beads. The sacred smoke of ceremony teases your brain's nostrils. Lunacy, some will say. Precise units, each 1/5 of a mile in diameter, connect earthwork to earthwork, basketful by basketful, shaping space at perfect eye level. Even the irregularities, the squeezing of corner and the widening of gap, claim lambency for the seeding of squash and the deliverance of antlers. On this flat open land, above the confluence of Raccoon Creek and the Licking River, lives a divine geometry made of and measuring earth, bringing moon down to saturate hallowed ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Please welcome our speakers here today, Curator of Archaeology at the Ohio History Connection, Bradley Lepper, Director of American Indian Relations for the Ohio History Connection, Stacy Halfmoon, Executive Director of the Ohio Travel Association, Melinda Huntley, and our host, the new Director of Tourism Ohio, Matt McLaren. Matt, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Mindy. Ohio, find it here. There's so many great reasons to visit our state, from Cedar Point and the Rock Hall to Ohio's Ice Cream Trail. And now what's so exciting, the opportunity for Ohio to have its first World Heritage Site with the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks. And this great panel here today, I'm going to start my first question. What are the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks?
Well, I guess I'll take that one. The Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks are the remnants of an incredible civilization, an ancient American Indian civilization that lived here 2,000 years ago that we call the Hopewell. And these sites that are included in this nomination, the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, are the best examples, the best in antiquity and the best preserved today examples of this monumental earthen geometry in some cases. The Newark earthworks, the two sites that make up the part of the nomination from Newark are the Great Circle and the Circle and the Octagon that Ricky read to us about just a moment ago. These are geometric earthworks built in geometric shapes on an amazing scale. The Octagon by itself would hold 4 Roman Colosseums. But in addition to the geometry, there's Fort Ancient, one of the other sites in the nomination, that's a hilltop enclosure. The walls are defined by the edges of the bluff on which it's built, and there are 3.5 miles of earthwork that enclose that bluff. And then the other sites are Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, which encompasses 5 different sites. Many of these are not as well preserved as the Newark earthworks remnants or the Fort Ancient earthworks, but they are ground zero for what the late archaeologist, the late Nomi Grieber, described as the Hopewell explosion. These are the places where this all started. And there are 5 other sites: Mound City, Hopewell Mound Group, one of the most magnificent sites. That the excavations there have given us much of what we know about Hopewell art and ceremony. And the Sipe Earthworks and Hopeton Earthworks right across the river from Mound City, and High Bank Works, which is the only other circle and octagon combination built by the Hopewell culture. And like Newark Circle and Octagon, the circles are identical, perfect circles, 1,054 feet in diameter, and both the High Bank Works Circle and Octagon and the Newark Circle and Octagon incorporate in its alignments all sort of 8 of the points on the horizon that, again, Ricky talked about, that mark the 18.6-year-long lunar cycle. So they're amazing remnants of this ancient civilization that had a very sophisticated knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and the engineering to build earthworks that have endured, in many cases, for more than 2,000 years.
That's amazing. 2,000 year right here in Ohio, going to become, hopefully, the next World Heritage Site. And that tribal nation connection is very interesting, too. And Stacy, I know there's several tribes, I understand, that are supporting the World Heritage nomination. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. One of the first people I want to mention when we talk about this nomination and all the effort that has been put into this effort and this nomination over the years, we think of the World Heritage Steering Committee, and we have had a phenomenal group of people from Ohio who have spent countless, literally countless hours and years putting their time into this and making sure this happened. And one of those people is Chief Glenna Wallace. She is the leader of the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, and she serves on the executive committee. And just want to acknowledge the many years, I think, when this was still a new concept to some of the tribes. Chief Wallace visited Ohio, visited the Newark Earthworks Center, and began to tour the site and realized just how significant these were and how significant they would be to all Native people. And so she has led the way. She has introduced these sites to many, many other tribes. And she even passed recently, she shepherded through in Oklahoma, in Ottawa County, where there are 9 tribes. These are federally recognized tribes that exist today. The majority of these tribes were tribes who were removed from Ohio in the 1800s, and now they are in Oklahoma, and they form what's called an intertribal council. So just to give you an example of the kind of support we're getting, Chief Wallace went to the intertribal council and proposed a resolution that they would all sign that will be part of the dossier for the nomination that we can attach and show that we have the support of federally recognized tribes today. And so I just wanted to share, if we have just a second, a little blurb of this actual tribal document that was signed. It says, whereas these sites were ceremonial and social centers and characterized by large earthwork constructions that feature precise geometric shapes and standard units of measure. Together, these earthworks are the best preserved examples of the more than 40 monumental earthworks constructed by the Ohio cultures in the Ohio Valley, which are distinct from other mound-building cultures in eastern North America. And whereas the designation of the 10 Ohio earthworks as World Heritage Sites would protect the earthworks from further development and destruction and be places to honor indigenous achievement. And that was signed by, this is the coolest part, Chief Ron Sparkman, the leader of the Shawnee tribe, Chief Wallace of the Eastern Shawnee, Chief Langford of the Miami tribe, Chief Fisher of the Seneca Cayuga tribe, Chief Berry of the Quapaw tribe, Chief Froman of Peoria tribe, Chief Cook of the Ottawa tribe, Chief Follis of the Modoc tribe, who were originally on the northwest coast and removed all the way to Oklahoma. And now he has all these wonderful tribal friends in Oklahoma that are leaders. Chief Billy Friend, who is the leader of the Wyandotte Nation. So all of those tribal leaders signed that resolution in support of these sites. So I think that speaks to the kind of support we have from the tribes today.
Absolutely. How unique. You have the tribal nations, the Ohio History Connection, and the tourism industry all up here supporting this World Heritage nomination. And right now you can go visit these sites, but do you think by having a World Heritage designation that we'll see more visitors?
Absolutely. I'll answer that one. So if we could only predict human behavior, right, we'd all be really wealthy. However, what we did do, thanks to Ohio History Connection, is had Ohio University's Voinovich School of Leadership conduct an economic impact study. And what they predicted, and this was a very conservative approach, was that visitation to those sites would double within the next 3 years. And by doubling that visitation, that would bring $125 million more into those local economies and create 181 jobs. Now, understand this is conservative, because what they said with that is that could be what would happen if we do nothing else, right? So if we just let the designation happen and we go about our business. With the stories you've heard already, and there's so many more stories about the cool things about these sites and just the ingenuity and innovation that occurred, if we are able to work regionally and statewide to tell these stories and to really promote these sites as well as what they stand for, we could very much see more than that. The other thing that's interesting is that just the inscription process itself has led to increased visitation at the Hopewell site. Not as much the others, but I think that has to do with the name. Right? So if we're calling these the Hopewell Ceremony Earthworks, that is what is out there. The Hopewell site is actually the one that's closely linked to it as far as a name, and they have had a 60% growth over the last 3 years. So just having conversations and raising awareness about these sites and what they stood for and the stories behind them could result in additional economic activity.
125 million, that's a big number, and I look forward to promoting this as part of Ohio Find It Here and helping that number grow even more. With the World Heritage designation, what is a World Heritage designation? And it's my understanding that these are listed because they're a masterpiece of human genius. Is that right?
Yeah, to be a World Heritage Site, and this is a program of UNESCO, the United Nations Scientific and Cultural Organization, you have to demonstrate that your cultural or natural site has outstanding universal value. And then there's several criteria that can be used depending on whether it's a natural or cultural site. And one of the criteria that we're using to nominate these sites, and it should be a no-brainer, is that they are masterpieces of human creative genius. I mean, the demonstration of this knowledge of astronomy and geometry and the way they're incorporated in this monumental architecture, when no other culture in the world built monumental architecture on this scale, when their social organization was so egalitarian. That is, there are no kings or pharaohs ordering these ancient American Indians about and telling them what to do. Villages from hundreds of miles away are coming together and cooperating to build monumental, standardized shapes incorporating all this sophisticated knowledge. So clearly, they're masterpieces of human creative genius, we think.
Now, all this connectivity to the sun and the moon, is there a best time to go visit these sites?
There's no best time to go see these sites. They're wonderful in all their seasons and every day. But I think on the times when the moon, the northernmost rise of the moon, for example, lined up with the octagon, were important times in the past. And I think just as there are special celebrations at Stonehenge when there's a summer solstice sunrise or something, I think once these are World Heritage Sites, we're going to have probably key events like that on some of those days when these sites were aligned with the cosmos in a special way.
What about today? What do the tribal nations think about these sites today?
That is a loaded question. Because I think it would depend on the tribal person you talk to, right? Everybody interacts with these places in a very personal way today. Some tribes have been more aware of the presence of these sites. Maybe they're in a closer proximity. Tribes in Michigan, tribes around the Great Lakes who weren't removed. I think when you think about the tribes who had been here, you know, Ohio's history goes all the way back, at least 15,000 years. We call it the heart of it all, right? Ohio has had quite the history, and American Indians have been here a long, long time. But when you look at that period of contact and ultimately forced removal for those tribes, it's a real challenge of what that means today, and it can be a challenge. One of the members of our American Indian Work Group has written about that and the frustration that he, in giving tours, this is Dr. Lowe, who works at Ohio State University, and he's a citizen of the Pokagon Band, Potawatomi. And he has the opportunity to visit the site a lot and provide tours. But he also wrote about how he has seen tribal citizens who feel very frustrated when they visit. They feel like they should know more about these sites, and they don't. And he says that is no fault of their own. How many of us know exactly what our ancestors were doing and thinking and what motivated them 2,000 years ago? So he's got some really interesting concepts about it that I think will carry forward once the site is inscripted and we are working with tribes today, what that means. It means so many things. There's a lot of research opportunities as well. Brad should probably share just a little bit about a research paper he did and published with the second chief of the Shawnee tribe, where they were looking at Hopewell objects, and they worked together on that. Will you just, because that's a great example.
Sure, and I have to say that I never imagined contemporary American Indians could teach me anything about Hopewell, because it's so ancient and so separate from their current lives. But in fact, Ben Barnes, the second chief of the Shawnee tribe, we were engaged in a conversation, and he was telling me how they create how they put the leather head on their ceremonial drum. And he said they use these perfectly round black pebbles that they get from a special place to wrap around the leather and then to tie them all together to tighten the drum down. And I said, well, gee, we have some perfectly round black pebbles that were excavated from the site mound. And he said, oh, and they're engraved. And I said, are yours engraved? And he says, well, no, we don't engrave them. And he said, how many are there? Are there 5? And I went, yes. And he said, well, that would be a small drum, but we use 7, but we have a little bit larger drum, but it has to be an odd number for this tying to work. Wow. And so we did more research and finally submitted an academic paper thinking that we've got now evidence for the oldest drum in eastern North America. The wooden and leather parts would have been all decomposed, but because there were stone components to the drum, it's been preserved. So arguments or artifacts that we used to think were marbles or gaming pieces, we now have, through this hypothesis from an American Indian who has these same ritual practices today, a new interpretation for these artifacts.
That is so cool.
It is so cool. And sitting here at a Columbus Metropolitan Club lunch, a lot of us in here are from Columbus. What does this mean for Columbus, Ohio?
I'll answer that one. And first of all, I gotta get the goosebumps off, right? Because every time Brad talks about this project, I do get goosebumps. It's so inspiring. So what is, how is it good for Columbus? I think also how is it good for the state? I think first of all, this process we've been going through is a good thing in and amongst itself. I think the World Heritage nomination process is a lengthy one. It is a detailed one, and it's allowing communities to come together and work together. And we have seen increased collaboration between different communities just in the process thus far. And as far as I know, we don't teleport when we travel, right? So that means anyone coming to these sites is going to be traveling through other communities to get to these sites. There are some travelers who seek out these World Heritage sites in and amongst themselves. Plus the opportunity to generate additional international travels. They're going to come in at our gateway cities. So we really need to think about this project and this opportunity on how do we elevate not only these sites, but the state of Ohio to the world stage, because they will be traveling through into all parts of Ohio in order to access these sites. I think the other thing that's really unique about this project is you've heard Brad talk about why this was designated or why it's being considered, and the ingenuity, the innovation. That is a message we carry through today in the state, correct? So anytime we are able to have a conversation about Ohio, about our innovation, about our ingenuity, about our engineering marvels, this is a really good opportunity to shine, not only as a place to visit, but as a state to relocate. And I just recently read that, a third of all those principals who are relocating their businesses visit first as a traveler. So what opportunities are there for us in Columbus and state as well as those communities? Lots of opportunities. It's what we do with it.
Well, thanks, Melinda. I like to hear about more visitors. I know our numbers are already good on international. They're going up, and this can make them go up even more. On the Ohio History Connection side, can we talk a little bit about the Ohio History Connection, both to the tribal nations and then also to this World Heritage designation?
Sure, absolutely. I'll just share very briefly a little bit about American Indian relations today. I mean, you can certainly see how, as the Ohio History Connection, as we manage our sites, that includes these sites. So this is very intricately connected to the work we're doing. But more broadly, the leadership of the Ohio History Connection, the Board of Trustees, has put forth a very strong vision for strengthening our relationships with federally recognized tribes who are affiliated with Ohio. So we are excited to be this fall will be our third Tribal Nations Conference, which we're hosting. We have invited the federally recognized tribes to come back, to come to Columbus, to meet with us, to hear about these projects. We have partnered with the Department of Transportation and the Federal Highways Administration here in Ohio. They co-host this conference with us. We've had a great turnout, just under 20 tribal representatives and actual tribal leaders have been coming here to Ohio to learn about these projects and hear what we're doing. So we're excited to keep that momentum going, to continue to work with tribes through whether it's historic interpretation at our network of sites. We have amazing sites like the Battle of Fallen Timbers, the World Heritage sites. We have so many Leo petroglyphs. We have so many sites here in Ohio that have American Indian origins. So we're excited to continue that work, to continue to meet our tribal partners and undertake projects like this that are forward-looking, while at the same time we acknowledge their history and their presence here in Ohio.
Yeah, and it's exciting. She talked about some of the other sites across the state. I truly see the visitors that are coming in for these 4 soon-to-be World Heritage sites, making sure that they stop in our cities, go to other Native American attractions, see other things across the state. And that really brings me to my last question here, and that is, how do we make sure we see the full benefits of this World Heritage designation?
I can take that one. I think, first of all, is identifying this project and working collaboratively will be of the prime most concern. Working not only to support this, but also how do we envision the future? So planning for success, so to speak. You know, we do have the choice in the markets that we want to go after, and so being very aware of the cultural heritage traveler and encouraging that traveler to come here who tends to spend the night, which an overnight visitor spends 3 times what a day visitor does. Helps not only in generating economic impact, but could minimize the number of people going to these sites. I think we also have to consider the increase in visitation, and the World Heritage process is very specific, you know, that has to be addressed. So we have to pay very close attention to how do we manage this experience. This is important to us in the travel industry as it is for those in preservation and conservation. So we have to plan for the success. We need to support entrepreneurship. You know, given success, there will be opportunities for growth. So how do we help these communities, many of them rural, develop additional opportunities for these travelers or amenities that may be amiss right now? And most of all, what all of you can do right now in the room to ensure its success is tell people about it and support the effort. But basically telling friends and family is one of the top ways that we can generate interest and passion for this project.
We are going to move to audience questions, and any of those of you that do have questions, please go ahead and line up at the microphone in the back of the room. While you do that, I am going to ask one last question. I'm actually going to give this one to Brad. The Ohio History Connections mission, how does that tie into this World Heritage designation?
Oh, I think it's perfectly aligned. I mean, the mission of the Ohio Historical Society is to spark discovery of Ohio's stories, embrace the present, share the past, and transform the future. And what better way to spark discovery about Ohio stories than to put our Ohio sites on the same list with the Great Pyramid of Egypt and Stonehenge and the Great Wall of China. I think that's going to do amazing things and economically transform the future for Ohio.
Well, now's your time. So for the audience, once you're at the microphone, please state your name and ask your question. And we'd like to get as many questions in as possible. So in fairness to everyone, please avoid any type of long editorial comments. And for the first question, please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Marie Trudeau. I'm with W.E. Davis Insurance, and thank you for the talk today. We have just such a fascinating history here in Ohio under our feet. Once this kind of moves through, we have so many other sites, like the Arc of Appalachia has a lot of sites, and that's all over. Will it open the door for these other sites to maybe get this kind of designation? Thank you.
Yes, I absolutely do think so. That the criteria for becoming a World Heritage Site, the first level, at least for United States sites, is it has to be a National Historical Landmark. And we're already working with sites like Miamisburg Mound, which is now on the National Register, but not listed as a National Historic Landmark, to get that designation bumped up, which could conceivably make them then eligible to apply for World Heritage inscription later on, because the Miamisburg Mound tells a different story than the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks. We also have Serpent Mound on the tentative list, which is basically the short list for sites to be considered for nomination to UNESCO from the United States. So that's another site that's sort of waiting in the wings. But we do think if tourists are going to come here and spend a day or two seeing these different Hopewell sites that are scattered around, they may well stay and see some of these other sites like Fort Hill, Miamisburg Mound, that aren't currently World Heritage sites, but that the people that bring the level of interest in these kinds of sites will want to see whatever they can while they're here.
Good question.
Yes. Well, we're talking about traveling and perhaps tens of thousands of people coming to Ohio because of this inscription. I understand that the Hopewells themselves did a lot of traveling and that they developed a pretty amazing trading network that extended many hundreds of miles, perhaps thousands of miles. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Guess I'll take that one too. Yes, I would not describe it as a trade network, although it has been used, that term has been used before, but we have artifacts found in Hopewell mounds that are made from copper from the upper Great Lakes, from shells from the Gulf of Mexico and from the East Coast, even as far away as Yellowstone Park. There are these giant obsidian spear points. They're not real spear points because they're made out of glass, this natural volcanic glass, but they're kind of examples or effigies of spear points. It's as if somebody was going to give you the key to the city to honor you. They wouldn't give you the key that would open the mayor's door. They'd give you a big symbolic key. And I think that's what these giant obsidian spear points are. Well, obsidian is volcanic glass. Every volcano has its own particular chemical fingerprint. This obsidian comes from obsidian cliffs in Yellowstone Park. And there are large quantities of this material found at the Hopewell Mound Group in particular. But there's almost nothing, very little, that's going out of Ohio in the other direction that would be a trading commodity. So instead, we think these are people coming from the ends of the Hopewell world bringing offerings of thanksgiving or supplication, which they leave at these sites, and then what they take away is just the spiritual experience of engaging in the ceremonies, perhaps actually being involved in building these earthworks. I mean, it'd be like participating in the Apollo space program or something, and the excitement of being a part of that. So I wouldn't characterize it as trade, but certainly the Hopewell had a continent-spanning interaction sphere, is the big word that archaeologists use. So we don't claim to know exactly what's causing it. But you're absolutely right about that interaction that Ohio was at the center of 2,000 years ago.
Finally, what about metalsmithing, copper and other types of metal?
The copper that was worked and silver and other metals worked by the Hopewell was not smelted, it wasn't melted, it was simply cold hammered into the various shapes and then cut into shape. And the copper from Upper Lake Superior was so pure that you could do that. It didn't require smelting, and sort of that metallurgy was never developed in North America.
Wow, thank you.
Maybe two people weighing in on this. George O'Donnell, with the added tourism, will there be more access to the Octagon Mound? Because when I saw the northernmost moonrise about 8-9 years ago, I will say with the elevated status, how many times a year do you think there'll be access to the Octagon Mound?
I can take that one. I think that's a really good question, and those are the questions that we're starting to answer as an entire community right now. Part of the inscription process is to make sure that you have a management plan in place that is not only good for economic development, but is sustainable. And so some of those questions, there are a lot of smart people who have been involved in this project thus far, and as we get closer to submitting the nomination, all of those questions will be answered as far as access and how to, again, protect that visitor experience while also enabling others to see it. So we will definitely be addressing all of those things as the process unfolds.
Hi, I'm Amanda Sage, and I'm with the Metropolitan Club. I have a two-pronged question about the inscription. How many World Heritage Sites are there in the U.S.? And how long is this process going to take before we actually find out if we've gotten it and it's good to go?
Give it to you.
Okay, well, I think there's 23 World Heritage Sites, and only a couple of those relate to Indigenous American heritage. We're hoping that if all goes well, that we'll be celebrating the inscription in 2021.
And we were talking about this at lunch. There's not another World Heritage Site within hours of Columbus. So that makes this unique as well. You have to go all the way to Philadelphia or Mammoth Cave, right?
Illinois.
Next question.
I'm Jane Scott. I actually have 2 or 3 questions, so since nobody's behind me, I always have a lot of questions.
You can fill the time.
I always get a lot of questions. What's the recent history of the mounds? When were they discovered? And I mean, somebody just kind of bumped into them and said, "Oh, wow, this is really cool. What is it?" And so, how did we know about these, and who figured this out?
Oh boy, this could take me a while, but I'll try and make this short.
We had time.
It's actually fascinating because the history of the mounds and the discovery of the past that they represent really is the birth of American archaeology. I mean, archaeology as a discipline in America developed around the problem of trying to answer the question of who were the mound builders. In fact, many of the early maps of the sites that are going to be inscribed as World Heritage Sites, the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, many of them were first published in the very first publication of the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian Institution Contributions to Knowledge #1. So these sites are intimately connected with not just the development of American archaeology, but the development of American science. And since really the birth of our country, when people crossed the Appalachians and came into the Ohio Valley and encountered these, there's been this burning curiosity. And some of that curiosity went in strange directions, like, well, it couldn't be Indians. Indians couldn't have built these amazing things. It must have been some lost race of white people, Phoenicians, ancient Hebrews, because only they're smart enough. But more than 100 years, more than 200 years now, of course, of archaeology has demonstrated overwhelmingly that these were built by ancient American Indians, the ancestors of today's American Indian tribes with roots in this same region.
And Stacy, do we know any of the connections to modern tribes and the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, or to Ohio and the tribal nation?
I don't believe, and there may be more research to come on this, but I don't believe, in my experience so far, have not learned of any specific connections where you can say the Hopewell archaeological culture is connected to specifically the Shawnee tribe or the Ottawa tribe. That's a lot of time. Those what we call archaeological cultures that existed at that time have probably changed, the dynamics have shifted. So that's a really interesting question. I'm sure the tribes would be interested in exploring that. I think there is a lot of research opportunity here. And, you know, it would be thrilling to have tribal citizens have an opportunity to come to Ohio and to study at the universities, to study these sites and to begin to learn this history for themselves and pose questions that are grounded in cultural knowledge. I think just like Brad was talking about that example of the stones from the site, until you have an opportunity to understand some of the cultures and the way they exist today, you can build upon those stories and add to it. So we have a lot of opportunity there. I don't know of any direct connection. I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but you may want to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to add that if you're going back to that geographic expanse of the Hopewell interaction sphere, I would say that the ancestors or the ancestors of any of the tribes in Eastern North America would have had direct experience of the Hopewell ceremonial earthworks.
And Stacy, I know you're working with a lot of the tribes right now. Is there a sense that they want to come back and they want to participate and potentially connect themselves to the earthworks?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, you know, that was part of the reason when we started the Tribal Nations Conference was an opportunity to invite them back and to share what we're doing and to share the World Heritage nomination. Some of the tribes weren't even aware of this effort. I think because of removal, you have children who today, their heritage would be here in Ohio around some of these sites, but they've grown up in Oklahoma or Kansas or another state. So they haven't had that opportunity to connect. So I think we're really trying to strengthen those connections and make sure the tribes have an opportunity to stay involved, to continue to learn and to continue to teach us.
Well, we certainly welcome them back. Another question from the back?
If I can ask a second and a third.
Sure.
One question's very, very easy. Is there a Native American or an Indian trail, like there's a craft brewery trail and winery trails? Are we doing that?
I'm going to take a moment and talk about Ohio's adventure trails. It's been a recent phenomenon. Visitors want to take trails across the state. And on ohio.org, you'll find over 40 trails, craft breweries, Dayton Aviation Trail, Lake Erie Shores and Islands Thrills Trail. A lot of these already existed, and we've begun marketing them. We've begun adding, it's only about 2 months in that we've been doing Ohio's adventure trails. We've begun adding trails. And Jane, I think that's a great suggestion. None exist yet, but I'm sure with the panelists that are on stage here, we can get together, and that's something that can come together.
I could see that as a Great Lakes, because the Great Lakes region,
right.
and do some multi-state.
So there is
kind of thing.
a website, Ancient Ohio Trails. ORGCOM, I can't remember.
Just Google Ancient Ohio
Google
Trail.
Ancient Ohio Trails, which is the beginning of such a project, so it could easily be expanded upon.
Okay, and
That does link some of the sites.
One last question for Brad. What are the chances of maybe there's some other great archaeological thing that hasn't been discovered yet?
There are always great archaeologists. When I was a kid, I worried that all the great discoveries would be made before I became an archaeologist, but nope, they're always out there waiting.
It's a great question.
My name's Jenny and I'm a teacher. Are there going to be increased resources available to educators to help encourage the study of Native American, because it's not a huge part of the Ohio historical standards? So are there going to be new things that are going to be available to educators?
Yeah, I would be happy to speak to that. One of the recent initiatives at the Ohio History Connection is related to education and a focus on K through 12. And we're really developing the vision for that, and it absolutely includes education and learning, in particular, around World Heritage. So I think there was a lot of opportunity, I think, connecting to this. In addition to the sites, that richer American Indian history in Ohio as well, we're really excited to begin to develop curriculum around that and to have that being taught and learned across not only Ohio, but anyone who's interested in this heritage. So there will be more to come on that.
And I would just like to add that it's my hope that once these sites become World Heritage sites, we won't be able to keep them out of the standards.
Yeah. And another question from the back.
Yes, my name is Doylene Williams, and I'm with Leadership Ohio. Can you share with us what the backstory is to why these mounds have not, maybe in their earlier years of discovery, been torn apart or mowed down for a shopping mall or whatever?
Well, in fact, many earthworks, hundreds or thousands, were in fact destroyed. In fact, the town of Circleville used to be the site of two circles, one inside the other. The outer circle had the same diameter as Newark's Great Circle, and the inner circle had the same diameter as Newark's Observatory Circle, the one that's connected to the octagon, showing more of that geometrical regularity. But it was two circles connected to a square. Well, now the only thing left of those is the name of the town, Circleville, to tell you there were ancient circles there. So, but what's really special about sort of Newark and Fort Ancient and these Hopewell culture sites is that local communities took efforts to preserve at least pieces of that ancient heritage. In the case of Newark's Great Circle, it became the county fairgrounds, and there used to be a racetrack running around the inside of it. Of course, the circle and the octagon, since 1910, has been a golf course. I think these all reflect creative initiatives on the part of local communities to try to preserve some of that heritage. And they were all, when they were conceived, thought to be respectful of the American Indian mounds and ways to preserve them as part of the contemporary landscape.
And the World Heritage designation is only going to protect them even more, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, it's exciting. The Hopewell ceremonial earthworks. Oh, do I have one more question in the back?
Two, maybe. Just curious, I know there were maybe dozens of mounds at a time in Franklin County. There's one remaining I'm familiar with, the Campbell Shrum Mound. What is the significance of those in the context of these other earthworks?
Well, the Campbell Shrum Mound is an Adena mound built by the ancestors of the Hopewell culture. It's kind of odd. It's preserved in this little island of sort of purity amongst the roads and other developments. All of those pieces, like this website, the Ancient Ohio Trail makes clear, are remnants of this ancient American Indian heritage that are part of the World Heritage story. And I really do think all of these sites could become tourist attractions better visited because of the rising tide lifting these World Heritage sites.
And I guess connected to that then, are there any special legal protections a UNESCO designation gives these in regards to land use or future land use or sales? Do you guys know anything about that?
No, they're managed by the Ohio History Connection and the National Park Service, and they'll continue to be managed by them. We'll have, our management plans will be probably pumped up a little bit to meet world standards, but they're the standards we want to meet anyway. So there's no special new requirements that World Heritage will impose on us.
Well, it is exciting to see these Hopewell ceremonial earthworks on the verge of becoming World Heritage Sites right here in Ohio. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mindy now.
Well, I hope you found today's forum interesting. Please help me thank our sponsors, Fahlgren Moortine, Ohio History Connection, and Ohio Travel Association. And let's thank our speakers, Matt McLaren, Bradley Lepper, Stacy Halfmoon, Melinda Huntley. We look forward to seeing all of you in